We have another huge San Antonio Spurs Jaylen Brown trade update as Charania reveals brand new details that the Celtics are wide open to listening for offers of Jaylen Brown. And another report from Chris Mannix of Yahoo indicates that Brian Wright and the Spurs could very well be after Jaylen Brown, but it would likely involve Dylan Harper moving on from the draft. We have a lot of stuff to get into. These new reports from Shams, Chris Mannix, and the odds that the Celtics and Spurs can pull off a blockbuster trade all coming up on this episode of Spurs Digest. And we have Nick from Celtics Digest who just covered this as well, so go check out the video links down below. So look, we got to dive into a bunch of things here. We'll start with this from Evan Siddery. We got a few things to get into. There's a sense among rival teams that Jaylen Brown is not completely untouchable on the Celtics roster. It would take a mammoth offer for Boston to even consider trading Brown, but the possibility certainly appears in play. Everybody but Tatum seems to be in play in Boston. And look, even Sham said, look, teams are making big offers for Jaylen Brown and Derek White. So first of all, Nick, in terms of Jaylen Brown moving on, from a Celtics perspective, I imagine if they want something back, it would take a lot of roster players from the Spurs and would probably start with the number 2 overall pick. I mean, from the Celtics perspective, what are the odds that Jaylen Brown it could actually get moved, let alone to the San Antonio Spurs?
Yeah, obviously the Celtics are at a point now where they want to and they need to clear salary. Now, the number one option for the Celtics and Brad Stevens has been Kristaps Porzingis and Drew Holiday. They're going to be involved in a bunch of trade talks, neither of which are super likely for the Spurs. Maybe there's a world where they go after a guy like Drew Holiday. For Jaylen Brown, you can see the report from Shams, and basically they're listening to trade offers for Jaylen Brown. It would take a lot from the Spurs. Now, the number 2 pick is, of course, going to be the thing that is most likely if a deal does go through. There was initially some rumblings about the Celtics wanting, Stephon Castle. Probably never going to happen, especially following, the rookie of the year, all those different things. That part isn't going to happen. But for the Spurs, point of view, if they want him from the Celtics, it would begin with the number 2 overall pick. But the biggest problem here is the salary matching. Now you have, of course, Vassell, you have some other guys that can, Keldon Johnson. But for the Celtics, they would only go this route if, of course, they want to retool and then prepare for Jason Tatum, who's going to be out most of next year. But they're at a point now where they don't have the luxury anymore of waiting around and hoping that things work out. They have to get under the luxury tax, new ownership, all these different things. So they're listening to offers. I think if he becomes fully available, the Spurs probably have as good of a package as anyone. And I mean, you could say that for Kevin Durant trade. You can say that for Giannis trade. So it makes sense, especially from the Spurs perspective, I think here, depending on what the package is. But it would take a lot. And I don't think the Celtics are actively engaged in conversations, but they're listening to offers. And I think the only way a deal would get done right now would probably be involving Stephon Castle. But maybe over the next coming weeks, if Brad Stevens wants to kind of pivot into a different avenue next year, which would be without without Jaylen Brown, and then work with Jason Tatum the following year, then they might be considering other offers.
Yeah, like Stephon Castle, of course, other teams are going to want him. Rookie of the year. He had an unbelievable year. But from a Spurs fan perspective, no one wants to let go of Stephon Castle, and he seems as close to untouchable as it gets for players not named Victor Wembanyama on the Spurs. So that's where the talk starts shifting to the number 2 overall pick and likely Dylan Harper, because he's seen as the clear second best player in this draft behind Cooper Flagg. I mean, that seems to be the consensus. We got Ace Bailey, VJ Edgecombe, but they seem to be a tier below. And Dylan Harper does fill that guard role. He's 6'6", and a lot of people are saying he could have gone number 1 this past year over a guy like Stephon Castle, over a few guys over the last number of years. And with the uncertainty that's been arising around the number 2 pick in San Antonio, with just recent reports over the last 24 hours or so coming out saying the Spurs actually may not take Dylan Harper at number 2. This came out yesterday, and then today, as the recording of this video, Kevin O'Connor, saying hey, yeah, the Spurs plan A might not even be to take Dylan Harper. The 76ers are interested in trading up to number 2 for the San Antonio Spurs, all this stuff. The Spurs seem to be entertaining offers for that number 2 pick. So when we're looking at, again, a Kevin Durant trade, we're saying maybe not number 2, but for Jaylen Brown, who has a lot more team control, albeit at a very high salary, of course, that's probably where this would have to start for San Antonio. And I know a lot of Spurs fans, let me know down below what you think about Jaylen Brown for the number 2 pick, but does it change your mind now that Dylan Harper's name is kind of uncertain? But Nick, we got to dive into the other report today from Chris Mannix, who said this on the KOC show. He straight up said, if Brown is in play, that's someone I think San Antonio will look at and will go after. That's someone I think if you're the Spurs, you're willing to give the number 2 overall pick, plus that kind of poo-poo platter of players in the Kevin Durant conversation. Now, the rumors for Durant, they've been as low of a package as the number 14 pick, Devin Vassell and Harrison Barnes. We've seen some talks of maybe trading up from number 14, maybe using that pick, or including someone like Jeremy Sochan. But, Nick, if we're talking number 2 pick at this point, look, the Spurs have a window. They need a winning player. without Stephon Castle in this trade, let's assume he's completely off the table. If we're saying number 2 pick and some of these players, do you think Dylan Harper could be that level of guy for the Celtics that just kind of makes sense in terms of sending them into this new generation, I guess, of Celtics basketball? You get off of a huge contract in Brown, bring in a much smaller contract, of course, in Harper. Now, again, you'd have to salary match as well in the trade, but like, to me, this seems like a deal that could make sense for Boston, though again, I think from San Antonio's perspective, it's a tough sell, especially with the huge cap hit that would come with a Fox extension, a Wemby extension, Sochan extension, and all the other stuff in between.
Yeah, I mean, the Spurs will do it if they think they can win, if Jaylen Brown puts them over the top, which I think there's an argument to be made that he could. From the Celtics point of view, I don't think they do it, simply because, of course, they won a championship, last year. And now if you go with this route, you're basically swapping, for all intents and purposes, Jaylen Brown for Dylan Harper, but of course you shed the salary. Now, I would put money on Jaylen Brown being the better player for the next 5 years to help you win a championship than you would Dylan Harper. Now, if that's not the case and he ends up being some superstar, which is very possible, he is very highly touted, I just think even at the cap hit, and that's the biggest differentiator here, I think that there's a better chance that the Celtics win with Jaylen Brown. And ultimately, I think the Celtics' goal is to still win a championship. They have Jason Tatum in his prime, entering his prime, and he's going to be through that. I don't know if they'd want to pivot that differently. And I think that's the biggest, issue here, is that the Celtics, I think, would need to get back some more win-now players. Now, you could argue that Keldon Johnson, Devin Vassell, paired with Dylan Harper, then maybe that's a more complete team. And you can make that argument depending on how you think they are. But I feel like in order for the Celtics realistically to move on from Jaylen Brown, it would need to be more than the number 2 overall pick. Now, Stephon Castle, if he's off the table, then you can kind of start to look at teams other than the Spurs. And there's obviously a ton of teams that would want Jaylen Brown. And I feel like there's teams that would probably want and be willing to give up something that, works a little bit better with salary. Because, of course, the Celtics need to shed salary. That is their number 1 priority. It's easier to, you can see here, it's easier to do it through Jrue Holiday, Kristaps Porzingis, Sam Hauser. They're going to keep Derek White, I think. I don't see a world where there's really a big trade for him. I mean, there's a lot of teams that would give up a ton of assets, but he's a winning player. And everybody but Tatum being on the table, the Celtics are still in a very good position. Yes, Tatum's going to be out next year for the majority of it, if not all of it. They're still in a position to win. The problem is, if they have to shed salary, then maybe you keep Jrue Holiday instead and you get rid of Jaylen Brown. It's the way they want to go. I don't think, though, Dylan Harper moves the needle enough in the next, 3 to 4 years. Though the salary is the biggest thing here. You'd be able to kind of keep some of the other guys, but we've seen how a lot of these draft picks end up working. Some work great, some don't work. Think of obviously a different level of prospect, but Scoot Henderson was supposed to be really good. He ended up being, a bit of a, not a bust fully, but a guy who has not helped towards winning basketball. And something easily like that can happen. And if you're giving up Jaylen Brown, I feel like Brad Stevens would play the safer route here, which is giving up Porzingis or Jrue Holiday, where you know what they're going to give you. They're not going to have, a breakout season, and then you get some assets back. So I do think they could get, depending on what they do, some interesting assets for, especially Jrue Holiday, maybe Kristaps Porzingis, depending on the suitor.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also depends on their contracts, because Holiday's locked up at a higher cap hit into his mid-late 30s for a longer term, and Porzingis is, I believe, is expiring, right? Now, we've talked a little bit about Porzingis to the Spurs in some world as well. I don't know if the salary really works out that well, especially since it's just 1 year of Porzingis, and I know some Celtics fans haven't been super thrilled with the performance that he had later in the season, but regardless, he's a little uncertain with injuries, stuff like that. But yeah, like you said, the Celtics have to shed salary. The Spurs are looking to move into a winning culture right now, a team that missed the play-in this past year, but now have Stephon Castle after his rookie season, Wemby coming back fully healthy at the start of the year, and finally a full season of De'Aaron Fox and someone from the draft, or Jaylen Brown, Kevin Durant. So there is a world where a trade like this could happen, but I feel like while Jaylen Brown's a good fit for the Spurs, I don't know if I'm on board with locking up that much salary that long term. So we got to hear your thoughts down below on this whole situation, because not only is the Kevin Durant smoke coming, the Jaylen Brown smoke is coming. Something's going to go down in San Antonio. It's just a matter of what and when. But leave your thoughts on everything down below, because that'll do it for this episode of Spurs Digest. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, subscribe, and go check out the video on this on Celtics Digest as well. I'm Josh Gosse, my co-host Nick. We'll catch you in the next one.